Good morning and welcome to another edition of Vinyl Side. And guys, that was my fault for showing the wrong intro, but you're under the same banner. So Rock and Roll Union is proudly welcoming Vinyl Side. And guys, the show that digs deep on classic albums that may have just come out. A lot to do with this album today with Bob Marley's Exodus. But before we get through that, I want to say a shout out to our sponsor, Rosenfeld Dental Associates, located at 1095 Inman Avenue in Edison, New Jersey. Go rock your smile with the Rock Doc, David Rosenfeld. Voted one of the top dentists in Jersey for 2021. Mention Rock and Roll Union or CT, and you will get a great discount upon booking your visit. So, before we get started, I also want to say, guys, if you're watching this on YouTube, give us a like, subscribe to the page, and enter any comments that you want into the thread as well. So, because we're always looking forward to seeing what you guys think and seeing how you guys feel about these classic albums. So, Bill, man, a lot of great stuff on this album.
It is a terrific record. There is so much well-known material on this album. Pretty much all of side 2 is something of a Bob Marley greatest hits record, if you think about it. In fact, 5 of the songs on the Exodus album, including 4 of them from side 2, ended up on the Legend album that was released after Bob's death in 1984. One of the best-selling albums in the world, like 26 million copies sold, I think. So there's a lot of very familiar music on here, but there's also some music that is not as familiar, but it's also really compelling stuff.
Man, I got to say, we talked a little bit before we came on air. What blew me away and what I kind of took for granted was how great the Wailers were, man. Like, just some of the music that they put down on this album was absolutely fantastic.
They are an amazing group of musicians, or I guess I should say were, because at least one of them, Carly Barrett's no longer with us, but they were a tremendously tight unit. They were able to put together just such infectious grooves for the music. The first 3 songs on this album are not interlocked. I mean, they're not from the same take, but they sound almost as if they could have been. They are just so tightly sequenced together.
Yeah.
On this record, with pretty much the same hypnotic beat behind it. I mean, Carly, Family Man Barrett, and Junior Marvin were just amazing as a unit working behind Bob on this stuff.
Man, kicking this album off was Natural Mystic, and I got to say, phenomenal song. There's a vibe to this song that is great to open the album on. There's a very earth real feeling to this song, like something's brewing, something's going on. And I think Bob did this very well.
Yes. the song almost seems to be talking about the end of days. That the judgment day is coming. Many more will have to die. The lyric says, and it's hard really to understand precisely where Bob is going with this or what inspired him. His lyrics are deliberately sparse, I think, where I think he deliberately left them open to individual interpretation in terms of what people wanted them to mean. But at the time he made this record, there was a lot of unrest in Jamaica. There were a lot of political issues surrounding the then Prime Minister of Jamaica, Michael Manley. Marley had been approached to do a rally that at least ostensibly was in support of Manley. And right before that concert was to have taken place, some people broke into his home and they shot Bob and his wife Rita and his manager. And in part, people have speculated that the name of the album, Exodus, and the concept of that song are not only around returning to Africa, to the land of Haile Selassie, which is one of the core tenets of Rastafarianism, but also about Bob getting his buns out of Jamaica for his own safety. Much of the album was made in London at Island Records studios there. Bob had recorded for Island a number of years before this record was made. I think this was his fourth or fifth album for them. But generally, the approach had been that Bob would record in Jamaica and the tapes would be remixed, remastered, possibly overdubbed in London. That wasn't the case here. This whole record was made in London. And to a certain degree, I think it shows in terms of the tightness of the recording and the professional quality of the recording.
And going back a little bit to what you were saying as far as like end times, I kind of took it the same way, especially with the mention of the trumpets, that very biblical, where they talk about the trumpets ending, signaling the end times. He says could be the first trumpet, might as well be the last. So, I mean, yeah, I think that really has a lot to do with end times, a lot of prophesizing. And I think in a way, this whole album, we talk about the beginning kind of being political and very, very involved in Jamaica as far as meaning is concerned. And then the second side kind of being the greatest hits. To me, I took the whole album as a whole is you have these things in life that could drag you down, but enjoy your life while you can. And I really felt that it was a celebration towards the end of the album of life and love and cherishing family and that kind of thing.
Absolutely.
And then to go from natural mystic into so much things to say, I kind of went through the rabbit hole on this one and kind of there's so much in this song. So many things. He talks about Marcus Garvey. He talks about all kinds of history and people talking. I mean, the one part of the song that kind of got silly is he's going la 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 la, and to me, he's like mimicking what he's hearing from other people. People are talking too much. People are saying
blah 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 blah.
Yeah, exactly. So that's kind of how I took it, and like, but there's so much history, so many things in this song that kind of like I kind of look at, and I'm looking at the lyrics now, but he talks about crucifying Jesus, selling Marcus Garvey for rice. Paul Bogie, he talks about a lot in this song.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that perhaps is a little bit sad is I'm not sure that contemporary listeners of this album would have the first clue about who these people were, their significance in Bob's music. It's unfortunate, really. Again, in this song, Bob is getting very political. And you made an interesting comment that I agree with about the structure of the album. The first side is really the political side. I mean, it's really the deep thinking. It's definitely got the hypnotic reggae rhythm. And in that regard, it's danceable and it's very enjoyable to listen to. But if you think about the lyrics, he's really getting pretty deep. The lyrics aren't complicated. There's not necessarily a lot of lyrics to the songs, but what's there is exceptionally well thought out. He's sending a message with every one of these tunes.
Yeah, I mean, the other thing that comes to mind while listening to this is, and after what you just said, that kind of really sparks in me, is a lot of people use this music as an escape for like smoking weed or partying or whatever. And I think a lot of people do take a lot of these lyrics for granted and just kind of go straight to the rhythm of the music. But upon closer retrospect, man, there's so much involved in his music that I think he kind of gets a disservice when people go about listening to him that way.
Yep, I couldn't agree with you more. I mean, he was a terrific lyricist, and it really was only, I think, with his music around this particular time frame that people, at least here in the States, really began understanding and accepting how good a lyricist he was. Up until about 1975, 76, Bob Marley sold records in the United States, but it was largely to an exclusively black audience. There were some white people who knew of his music, and of course, there were the cover versions. I mean, Johnny Nash did Stir It Up, Eric Clapton did I Shot the Sheriff. So people had an awareness of who Bob Marley was, but I don't think it was really until his live album came out with that fantastic version of No Woman, No Cry on that record that people really began to understand this is a pretty important artist.
Yeah, I mean, it's amazing the things that he was able to do in such a short time. Definitely one of the greats, cut down way too early. I would have loved to see his viewpoints on some of the things that happened later on as far as history is concerned. Because it's always the people that, like, you go back and you go, I wonder what they'd say about this. I wonder what they'd say about that. And he's definitely in that realm. The next song, we talked about the first three kind of being in that same vibe, is Guiltiness. And Guiltiness kind of follows the same way as the other tunes. This is kind of like the rich feeding on the poor, which is kind of what this song reminded me of.
The big fish eat down the little fish.
There it is. And that they'll pay for it later. They'll what's the term that he uses? They'll be eating sorrow.
The bread of sorrow.
Yeah, there it is. The bread of sorrow. Bread of sorrow pops up so many times in this song. It really is a song of the mighty feeding on the meek. And
yeah, one of the lyrics of this I find interesting because I think it's deliberately written badly to catch your attention. Bob writes, woe to the down pressers, they'll eat the bread of sorrow. I don't think I've ever heard the word down pressers before. Oppressors, yes, but not down pressers.
Yeah.
But it struck me as I'm listening to this, maybe he said it incorrectly to catch your attention with it.
Well, going back to the song before this, one of the lines that he said in So Much Things to Say was my innocence.
Yes. I think he might have done the same thing there.
And I'm like,
Bob was not a stupid man.
No, not at all. And like I said before, Rastafarianism had a lot to do with he smoked a lot of marijuana. He had that going for him, but he was also a very deep thinker. And it wasn't just him killing brain cells. It was like he really knew his place in history. He really knew what was going on politically, and he was not stupid by any means. And following Guiltiness up is The Heathen. And I got to say, musically, this is one of my favorite tracks off this album, especially for the Wailers. There's some great guitar work on here. Just love Guiltiness, man. I think this song jams as just musically overall is one of my favorites.
Yeah, now you mentioned the guitar track. Junior Marvin had recently joined Bob Marley and the Wailers. I think this is his first studio album with them. and his guitar playing is somewhat understated in the sense that it's not generally out front, and the guitar solo in this one is behind the backing vocals that Bob and the I3s are doing, but it is such a well defined and very evocative solo. It's a very, very good piece of musicianship on his part.
Man, and I'm not sure if, because I don't have I do have a copy of this on vinyl, but I don't have it in front of me. That, I believe, was the last track on side one.
No.
No. So
Exodus was
the last track. So Exodus, we talked a little bit about that as well, as far as him kind of having to leave Jamaica, him needing to leave for his safety, and perhaps that's where the Exodus kind of thought came from.
Well, I think that's part of it. I think there's definitely, to go back to a comment I made earlier, I think there is something of the Rastafarian back to Africa, sentiment in the song too. And you hear that, at least I pick that up with the fanfares of the horn section coming in this. Bob and the Wailers had used horns previously, but very sparingly on records.
Yeah.
But they're pretty much right out front on this one. It's what also strikes me about Exodus is, and maybe this is just me extrapolating when this record was made and what else was going on in the world at the time. Exodus always struck me as a disco song. It's got the length, certainly, but it's also, more than any of Bob's other music, it has the disco beat.
Yeah.
And you can picture people in clubs dancing to this at length. I don't think it was an accident, but about a year and a half after this song was released, there was a disco song that very closely patterned it from an American artist, the artist Edwin Starr. That name is one you might remember. Edwin Starr did the famous song "War, What Is It Good For?" back in the early 70s. He ultimately, as many artists did, caught the disco train at the end of his career. And Edwin Starr wrote a song called "Eye to Eye Contact," which was a rather sizable disco hit, I think in 1978, early 79. The bass line of Contact is pretty much lifted from Aston Barrett.
Wow.
I mean, it's Exodus under an assumed name with different lyrics.
Wow. And, I'm looking at some of these lyrics, and you were right, as far as kind of going back to Africa. Like, we're leaving Babylon, we're going to our fatherland. Like, this is, and before that, it says, are you satisfied with the life you're living? So, yeah, there was like, and now re-looking at these lyrics and going back to the Marcus Garvey thing, and Marcus Garvey trying to get people to go back to Africa, I wonder if the two are related. And a lot of feeling on this, man. And I agree with the disco thing, because it really is. It's got that vibe to it. It's got that sound to it. But like lyrically, like we said, for the rest of the album, it's just so in there, so deep, that to simply write it off as a dance track is not.
You're ignoring the obvious with the lyrics if you just call it a dance track.
Yeah, you're right. So starting off side 2 is Jammin', which is one of Bob's most famous songs. This is like one of the iconic Bob Marley tunes, and just about having a good time, just about enjoying music.
Well, to a certain degree, I always thought of the title "Jammin'" as something of a double entendre. I want to jam it with you. I mean, it sounds like he's talking about sex, to be sure.
Yeah.
But at the same time, he's talking about holy Mount Zion and the rule of Jah. So it's to a certain degree, he's taking the sacrament of sex and equating it with the spiritual. And in that regard, it's rather unique. I mean, I don't want to bore you with trying to give a litany of how many rock and roll bands have sung about sex.
Right.
Bob does it in a different way, to be sure.
So he says, jams about my pride and truth I cannot hide to keep you satisfied. True love that now exists is the love I can't resist. So yeah, a lot of incorporating sex into spirituality there. And yeah, really, it's impressive. And like I said, it's one of the most well-known Bob Marley tunes. And it's funny, with it being about sex, you can hear this in like grocery stores, doctors' offices. Like, it's so funny when you hear this music, like places that are the most inappropriate places for this.
It's probably a signal that we're getting older.
And then Waiting in Vain. That's one of my favorite Marley tunes. And just talking about like just waiting for that love, waiting. I mean, just falling in love.
Well, there's almost an implied sexuality and promiscuity in here, though, too, where at least in one section of the lyrics, he seems to be talking about that he's waiting in line for the woman and he's going to wait his turn, whatever, because she's that special, even if she may not be that special to him yet.
Wow. Yeah, I mean, once again, like you said, this whole side of this album was like a Bob Marley greatest hits. Like this entire second side of this album. And I wonder, as far as sales are concerned with Bob, was this one of his most successful albums?
Other than for the greatest hits, it is his most successful by far.
And then From Waiting in Vain to Turn Your Lights Down Low, which is a very, very different ballad, but it does kind of remind me with the music, a lot of that 70s flair is in this song.
Yep.
A lot of that, the stuff that was big at the time, like love song wise, is really in this.
Yeah, I hadn't ever really thought of it that way, but you make an interesting point. It might very well have been inspired by music of Gamble and Huff and Barry White and such that was so big in that period of time in the middle 70s. Interestingly, though, this is the one song from side 2 that wasn't released as a single.
I was going to say, I had to go back and re-listen to this one because this is one that I had forgotten about. And yeah, that was the first feeling that I got was like, yeah, man, this like it reminds me of like all the classic love songs of the 70s, like that you used to see the infomercials for at like 2:30 in the morning. And then from that into Three Little Birds, which must be one of Bob Marley's most famous tunes. I've seen this in cartoons. I've seen this in commercials. I've seen this everywhere.
It really is a ubiquitous song of his. Probably the only one that's even more ubiquitous is the one that follows it on the album, One Love.
Yeah.
But Three Little Birds has a couple of different interpretations associated with it, apparently. Bob used to live on one of the wealthiest streets in Kingston, Jamaica. Was a house that had originally been owned by Chris Blackwell, the head of Island Records, who sold it to Bob. And it was stated, I think, by one of Bob's managers around the time of his death that Three Little Birds was written about 3 canaries who had made a nest on one of his windows. One of the singers in the I3s, his female backing group, though, Marcia Griffiths, I think, was the person who made the comment, said that the 3 little birds that Bob was referring to were the 3 women in the I3s, Marcia and Rita and Judy. And if you listen to the song, the female vocals are mixed way up on this. So maybe there's some truth to that, too.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, my wife watches this movie called Strange Magic. It's a George Lucas animated movie.
I know well.
She absolutely loves that movie, and this is a big, big song in that movie. And every time I hear this song, I got to think of that movie because, like, she's just absolutely floored with that. But then you were right, 100% on the song that comes after that, which is One Love, People Get Ready. And that that honestly could be like the commercial song for Jamaica. Like that's, and
It's
I
been
believe I've
used as
seen
that.
that. Yeah. I was gonna say, I believe I've seen that in like travel commercials and things
Mhm.
like that.
You absolutely have. It has been used that in that way for at least a few years. Um, this is actually the second recording of One Love that Bob did. One of the very first records that the Wailers made in 1965, when they were still working for Studio One Records with Cox and Dodd, was a version of this. And I think in some regards, Bob may have wanted to re-record it because over the course of time, he had gotten, quite frankly, screwed out of royalties by Dodd and by some of the early record companies that he worked with in Jamaica. So I think he wanted to get back a, a bit of the money and the notoriety that was associated with that music. Um, the full title of the song, as you said, is "One Love, People Get Ready." The song interpolates the original Curtis Mayfield and the Impressions tune, "People Get Ready," with the chorus. And I don't know if Mayfield was consulted on this, but I'm sure he didn't mind the royalties.
Yeah, I'm sure. And that sums up this album, which I think is one of the most iconic. So, I mean, like I said before, we put it in as a summer album. It's going to be. It's been since I was a kid, and probably will be after I'm gone. One of those albums that people put on in the summertime to kind of enjoy the weather, enjoy the vibes. Great for beach time, and Jamaica's been really using a lot of this music for a long time.
It's a wonderful record. As we said, yeah, it's a very well made record as far as the technology, the quality of the performances, and the songs are some of the best songs that Bob ever wrote. Certainly, some of the most identifiable with the man.
And so we put a close on that album. Just to touch base real quick, you guys, Legion of Prague has a show tonight. Am I right?
Yes, we do. We are at Artie's tonight, getting on stage sometime between 7:30 and 8 o'clock.
Nice. And you guys are playing how many sets?
Two. We will be on stage for probably a total of about 3 hours tonight.
Nice.
So, those of you out there who enjoy the prog rock of the 70s and 80s, if you enjoy bands like Yes, Genesis, Styx, Rush, King Crimson, come and give us a listen if you have a couple of hours to spare. Um, I think you'll find it is time well spent.
And you guys are playing the outside stage?
That I'm not sure. It may be the inside stage because I was told by Joe, the promoter, last night that there is a wedding going on in the afternoon, and we need to hold up our setup in deference to that. So that's telling me that it's probably the inside stage.
Okay.
But but regardless,
Yeah, either way, Artie's is an awesome place, guys, to check out his show. Just make sure that you guys, if you're into that stuff, which I am, I just wish me and Bill live so far away from each other that if you're in that area, if you're able to drop in, check that out, man. It's really well worth it. And moving forward, we're going to be doing some career retrospectives over the next little while. Let's not even put a cap on that. We'll say the next little while. We're going to be talking next career retrospective we're going to do is going to be on the Beach Boys. We're going to talk a lot about their music, their career. We can really split it into parts and kind of dissect what they've done, what they do. Brian Wilson is still out there, currently on tour. And following that, we'll be doing a career retrospect on my favorite, Jimmy Buffett. This year will be my 26th show. So it's a lot of fun. So we're going to be rocking this summer with some career retrospects that are really well worth it, some bands that are worth checking into. And Bill, any last words on anything?
well, as far as the career retrospectives are concerned, I think for those of us who are into music history and who enjoy hearing some of the backstory, I think there's a lot to be said definitely about the career of the Beach Boys. There's been over the course of the last 60 years, so much contribution to American culture that Brian Wilson, Mike Love, and the other members of the band have made. But it's also, I think, important, and you will talk about this in the course of the shows, that it's important to note that the Beach Boys evolved so dramatically over the course of their career,
Oh, yeah.
going from the original surf music into their studio period with albums like Pet Sounds, the Smile Project, which was aborted and then relaunched fairly recently by Brian Wilson and subsequently by the band itself. Their early 70s period, Brian wasn't as actively involved in, but made contributions to. But it also allowed other members of the band, particularly Carl and Dennis Wilson, to shine tremendously.
Yeah.
Some of their records from that period are very well worth hearing, and not just because of songs Brian wrote. So,
and there is some rich history with the Beach Boys. I mean, some that was even intertangled with Charles Manson. I mean, there was
oh yes,
bits and pieces here and there that just, their story is a crazy one, but very, very interesting, very well worth checking out, and really looking forward to doing this career retrospect with you, Bill, because it's going to be so much fun. So many hit tunes to talk about, so many backstories to talk about. It's just going to be a really good time. So, Bill, once again, thank you, brother. It was a great pleasure talking Bob Marley with you today. And guys, have a great week. And until next time, don't just leave it better.
Have a great day. Take care, everyone.